we're gonna lay some things out for you. And then we're going to talk about how we're going to take all of our ideas and galvanize them through policy, which is the Lansing Breathe Act. And then we're going to head over into our breakout groups where the facilitators will be leading those discussions, and you will have exactly 1 hour to lean in and lean out. And then we'll have a time where we come back finally and report out and have some next steps. If you have heard everything that I've just said, please give me a thumbs up and a smile. I need a thumbs up and a smile. I crack myself up. All right, let's move forward. Let's move forward. Let's go to our community, our beloved community. Let's read that. Our beloved community. Let's think about our community for a second. Think about all the people that are represented in our community. Think about all that happens in a community. So when I read this, I want you to just really think about where you live and all the diversities and all the things that are happening in our city. Here it is. When we talk about our beloved community, we want to build the conditions that create crime and violence are no longer present. I want you to envision that. What would it look like for us to come together and totally dismantle conditions that create crime and violence, where we are in a community where those things are not present? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? We've got such coalitions and relationships in our city. We've seen crime just absolutely go out of the window. It can happen. Number two, outcomes can no longer be predicted by race. Whoa, that's a big one. That's a huge one. And while you're going through this process, folks, we need you to believe that this is the beloved community that we are building. Number three, racial hierarchy is no longer the norm. Number four, everyone, and that means everyone, feels welcome. And last but not least, everyone feels safe. Everyone feels safe. Now, so this is the beloved community that we are building, and we want you to share that out. We want you to share that. We want you to talk about that. And this is what we're going to be challenging ourselves and pushing ourselves intellectually, emotionally, spiritually to build this together. I like to take us now. What we're going to do now is lay out. So what I want you to do is, if you got to take a picture of the screen, we're going to make the next couple of slides available to you. But if you want to take a picture of the screen, please do so. And I'm going to turn this over to Zach, and he's going to lead us in what does Lansing look like. Let's look at a local overview. Zach, can you take it from here?
Yes, thank you. So Aislinn and Jordan and I can work together to pull together some data to set some context for the rest of our discussion, just to be able to show where we are already. So on this first slide, we have broken down by race, just the Lansing population and the Lansing school district composition, which you can already see some trends there and some bias in terms of which students are actually staying in their community to attend school and which ones are using school of choice to attend other school districts. And Jordan has a quote here that I want to share around this. It's hard to face this, but all of our phrasing, race relations, racial chasm, racial justice, racial profiling, white privilege, and even white supremacy, serves to obscure that racism is a visceral experience. That it dislodges brains, blocks airways, rips muscles, extracts organs, cracks bones, and breaks teeth. You must never look away from this. You must always remember that the sociology, the history, the economics, the graphs, the charts, the regression all land with great violence upon the body, which is from a biography called Between the World and Me. On the next slide, going a little bit more into the composition of the actual school. So again, we have the school district's overall composition by race. And so where 38% of the students are Black. But if we look at the gifted and talented program composition for Lansing School District, they're only represented in 13% enrollment in those programs. And on the other side of the spectrum, the rates for suspension and expulsion, we actually saw 54% of Black students making up the composition of students who were suspended and expelled. A data point we didn't manage to put in here visually, but also really relevant, is that on average, students who are expelled or suspended in Lansing School District are suspended twice as long as they are in the rest of the state. Further than that, and kind of enforcing that dynamic, is that on average, for every 2 school resource officers, so those are police officers that are brought into schools to essentially police students, for every 2 police officers there are in the average school district in the rest of the state, Lansing Public Schools has 5. So more than twice as many that are there policing our children. But as you can see, Black students are vastly underrepresented in the gifted and talented program, and way over policed, both via suspension and expulsion and by actual literal police. On the next slide, we have some environmental data, which Jordan is going to help share with us.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. So we're trying to find a way to share a little bit of data around the environment and climate. And so the map that we're looking at actually comes from data from the University of Michigan. A group of student researchers put this together, and what it is measuring is called an environmental justice score. And so it's kind of a heat map. You can see in the legend there that the green areas, the lower the score, and the deeper the red color, the higher the score. And so this is measuring how much of the negative impacts of environmental issues. So this is a multitude of things, right? It's proximity to pollution, to traffic, smog, hazardous waste sites, things like that. It's measuring how much of this burden is falling to marginalized populations, including Black and Brown community members living in poverty. And so we can see that Lansing has several portions of the community falling in the top quartile, so the top 25% of the country. So that burden in these areas that are deeply red, that is where that burden of environmental hazards, these climate issues, are falling disproportionately to our most marginalized community members. Yeah, and the next slide, if we just want to, this is just one example of what this means. And so this is a story shared by a community member in the Lansing State Journal talking about the freeway that was built 496 that literally cut through the heart of a Black neighborhood when it was built. And so when we talk about proximity to traffic, this is just one example of what that means. And this is just a quote from that community member that was found in the article. So there's some pictures there as well.
But this next video is one of our, what we call our hometown oracles, Mr. Willard Walker. And we want to hear his testimony. He gave a phenomenal talk during the National Day of Racial Healing, but we cut out a portion of what he mentioned. And let's go back and listen to what it was like as an African-American in our city, and how difficult it was to obtain quality housing. And so I'm going to ask Sarah if she would play this clip, and I want you to think about your reactions. And so Sarah, can you play that?
When my wife came here, I said she wanted to come here. I knew I wasn't going to be in East Lansing. I had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. And it was my job to find a place for them that I felt was safe. And so that's when I moved to the West. I came to the West Lansing, which is where I saw Black people, and bought a house that the deed still says it should not be sold to a Black person. So we did research and evaluation. And so I was easy to spot. And so most of the police who drove by knew me, they saw me. Most of the professionals downtown, it's one way or the other, saw me. And so it was sort of like, again, who is this guy? He's a curiosity. Actually, I had police officers stop me to talk to me as I walked downtown to have lunch, particularly if I was by myself. I knew what that was about. And I also knew the curiosity. You know, I wore a coat and tie every day, as Dr. King said, you know when you're being watched, and that's when you got to get your shoulders up in the air, you got to get your head straight, and you got to walk with walk like you're confident in who you are. And so I never felt threatened, but I always felt watched.
So you think about, I don't know what your reactions are, and you can feel free to put those in the comment section, but think about the declaration last year that racism was declared as a public health pandemic. Think about the stress of not being able to just go to work as an American citizen and don't have to worry about I'm being watched. And at what point do you get to even me being watched turns into I feel threatened? And so his story is very similar to many African Americans across the country. And this is in every area of our life. There are times when I worked in corporate America, I bought 2 cars, a bum car, and I never drove my nice car to work because you're always being watched. Jordan made a very good point about the 496 project. Many don't know that there were affluent African Americans who owned gas stations, that when the 496 project came through, it displaced Black entrepreneurs and those who had homes. They were forced out of their homes and forced on the other side of 496, where they were redlined, and the systems corroborated together where the banks would not give you a loan outside of the South Side. The realtors wouldn't even show you a house in Okemos, wouldn't show you a house in East Lansing. There's no way. You're not allowed in these areas. And so again, this is our city. So you can understand why we are appalled when our elected officials act as if we don't have a problem and we can just marathon our way through life. So we have to have a sense of urgency. And so I want you to put in that comment section, what are some of your reactions to just that small portion? And we want to move to the next area, and let's look at some more data here. And I think it's 14.
Yeah, so just to continue off of what Mordecai was talking about, these are current numbers that we're looking at just to drive home the point about the economic inequity that exists in our city. So overall, still currently, Lansing's Black residents are 35% less likely to be homeowners, and they're 70% more likely to be unemployed. And on the next slide as well, so based on our median incomes for 2019, for every dollar that white residents earned on average, Lansing's Black residents only earned 62 cents. And all of this also obviously culminates into an effect on people's health, their longevity. So still currently, Lansing residents who are Black can expect to live on average 4 fewer years than Lansing residents in Lansing and the East Lansing metro area. And I have to say, we talked a lot about how to structure this slide in particular, because it honestly is so morbid, but especially with the infant mortality rate. On average in Lansing area, Black infants are twice as likely to die before their first birthday when compared to white residents. I think the average was about 4.2 per 1,000 infants, whereas white families, it was a little bit over 2. So twice as many don't make it to the age of 1. And then some statistics specifically about COVID-19. So obviously very recent, but we have to think about these numbers in the context of the things that have led to these statistics aren't recent, right? This is a manifestation and it's a product of ongoing inequity and lack of access to being able to live a healthy life. So currently, according to Ingham County Health Department, as of yesterday, Black residents are 37.5% more likely to contract COVID-19 compared to white residents. And if you were to take that data and look at our population and the infection rates, and then the morbidity rate across the nation, you can basically attribute that to 400 additional infections among Black folks and 12 additional deaths in our city for Black folks. Whereas if they had just had the same ability to prepare themselves in the same health levels essentially as the white residents, that many fewer people would have been infected with long-term health consequences, and that many fewer people would have been dead. And again, this is a product of pre-existing inequity, and you're just adding this additional layer on top of that with the pandemic. The majority of the heavy lifting in situations like this is borne by Black women. And despite the fact that the priorities in addressing this are urgent, we've lost over 240 lives to COVID-19 in Ingham County. And yeah, again, it's inequity that's existed there, but we're seeing it play out in an unfortunately really predictable way. And our last slide, it kind of has statistics. This is a chart from a study that was done by Ingham County Health Department, and it's a poll that asked healthcare providers what services they referred their patients and their clients to most often that were available in the community. A lot of this has to do with mental health and other resources to be able to help people out when they're in need. If you take a look at the way that their priorities, we have way up on top, community mental health services, home care and hospice services, public health services, substance use treatment services, and go all the way down. At about 14%, you have other. At 7% you have, I do not refer patients to community resources at all. And tied with, I don't refer to people to anybody is also the police department, which is not surprising given our ask to defund the police. And in a couple slides, we have some statistics about the current budget for the Lansing area. And I would just keep in mind the way that the priorities shook out in this survey and the way that our priorities shake out in our budget as a city.
Thanks, Zach. And so here are our priorities that we have identified through the prior people's assemblies, and we're going to further narrow and bring some further granularity to these priorities. But we wanted to cover these. Number one, and you'll see why we're calling for, you should be able to fully grasp this, is to defund the police and invest the money in community organizations. We're not talking about to defund or divest and put the money in frivolous projects. We're talking about building the beloved community. Number two, ensure livable wages for all to meet basic needs without worry. Surely that isn't an astronomical ask. That should be something that we all desire. And then divert funds to community programs in mental health help, and more preventative measures, right? When we take a look at the budget, when we look at this next slide, what we see is that 61% of the city budget goes to police and fire. Police and fire, is that what we want? So if you were running your home, 61% of your income would go towards your alarm system and your fire extinguishers and all the other services that, would keep your home safe in case of a fire, right? And we looked at what were the predominant calls that, the police were responding to. Many of them were what Zach was talking about and presenting. Many of those calls, and we'll find that slide and add that slide in as well. So we want you to really think about, if you're running at home, is this an acceptable budget for your house? That 61% of your income goes to police and fire. Let me check the comment section here. I know we've got some great comments. The next largest section is still less staggering, 10%, right? And so I don't know if you all can see that, but this is the reason why we are meeting today. There has to be another way to allocate and disperse the money that we are all a part of, the pot that we're all putting money in through our taxes. So how are we going to now move this into action? We are now collectively creating what we would call is the Lansing Breathe Act. The Lansing Breathe Act. There must be policy. So, Black Lives Matter is an organization for Black and Brown people that you can be a part of as an individual. But there is also the movement for Black Lives that include Black and Brown BIPOC organizations, Black-led organizations who've come together for coalition building and creating policy around these priorities. So there's a federal, there'll be a state, and what we are drafting is the Lansing Breathe Act. So again, this is how we're moving the needle forward. If we could go to the next slide, and the 4 simple ideas again are divest federal resources. So we're thinking about this from a local context, in divesting local resources from incarceration and policing. True community safety, invest in new, non-punitive, non-carceral approaches to community safety that leads states to shrink their criminal legal systems and center the protection of Black lives, including Black mothers, Black trans, and Black women. Now, again, in our city, African Americans make up 22 to 23% of the total population, but over half of those prosecuted. So in every indicator, you see the disparities. Meaningful investment in people and holding officials accountable. Sarah, if you could go over to slide 24, because the discussions that we want to try to get everybody over into is right here. Section 3 of the Breathe Act, create funds so that our tax dollars support programs to directly build. So when we go into our breakout sessions today, folks, we're looking at education, we're looking at housing, healthcare, environment, and economic justice, right? This is section 3. So that's what we want to center our discussion, right? We want to have those most vulnerable, and these are the discussions. How are they impacted educationally? What can we do to reverse these statistics? What can we do? What policy, what measures, what programs? How do we actually take and reverse what we are seeing here? So I'm going to ask Erica if she would read our community agreement. And before Erica, you read our community agreement, thank you, Sarah. We have our Michigan and Lansing Breathe Act. So Representative Sarah Anthony, she's championing our local Breathe Act. The federal version of the act includes several hundreds of bills that need to be tackled and revised for Michigan, right? And that's what we're working on. And some of the proposals have already passed through the Michigan legislature. Some are in progress, and some are new concepts. This will reflect the broad and specific scope of the federal bill: police and criminal justice reform, healthcare, economic, educational, and other topics. So we are now crafting the Lansing Breathe Act. And so we're bringing you into this discussion. So Erica, if you could read our community agreement, and after Erica is done, if you are in agreement with this agreement and stand, we ask that you would just, wave at us and let us know that we're all on the same page. Erica?
Absolutely. As a member and or a supporter of the Lansing community, I agree to make a conscious commitment to honor the following agreements. Respect the rights of others to hold opinions and beliefs that differ from your own. When you disagree, challenge, critique the idea, not the idea, not the person. Affect, practice intentional listening. Let your comments, requests for clarification, critiques, etc., reflect that you have paid attention to the comments made by the person who spoke before you. Inclusion, take space, make space. Be mindful of others. Share responsibly. If you have much to say, try to hold back a bit. If you're hesitant to speak, look for opportunities to contribute to the discussion. Grace, recognize that we are still learning. Be willing to change your perspective and make space for others to do the same. Sanctuary, create a safe space for sharing. keep personal stories that people share confidential. Always be guided by and offer contributions that are rooted in and come from our desire to improve our beloved community of Lansing.
All right, thank you very much. If you are in agreement, I saw a couple thumbs up, wave at us and let us know that we're in. Thank you very much. All right, I'm gonna ask Sarah. So your questions are on the screen. You have 1 hour. What should an urgent response in these areas look like in Metro Lansing? What needs to be in place to make this response possible from an education, environmental, economic, healthcare, family justice perspective? Who needs to be prioritized in crisis response, and what might that look like? What should Lansing People's Assembly do to welcome more residents into this process and space? And how do we ensure that the voices of those mostly directly impacted are represented when they may not be at the table? So here's how this works. Everyone you may feel like you want to listen in the group and you don't want to actually respond to every question. So there's enough here for everyone to weigh in on.